I think Vipers is just about to join us, but I'll start with some preamble for this to explain what we're planning on doing, a bit of context for people. What we want to do is enhance the capabilities of the user interface and solve problems that people currently have that prevents them using a combination of Argo workflows and Argo events. And those specific problems are that there is no API for Argo events. There's no CLI and there's no user interface for it. All your operations need to be done through kubectl. At the moment, if you compare it to other similar scheduling tools, they often have a user interface that allows you to do various different things. So we also want to solve that problem, but we also want to solve another kind of independent but kind of similar problem, is that the current implementation of Argo workflows doesn't allow you to import that code into a Golang application easily. You can import it, but it's not easy. And we get a lot of complaints from people about it. So the plan is to move Argo workflows onto v3 to enable us to do probably three or four things, I think. The first one is to fix that Go modules problem. You're kind of mandated to go to v3 to do that. The second thing is to allow us to build a user interface that supports Argo events without making dependencies difficult. And the third thing is to enable new use cases. And the final thing is I think there's a potential for it to be easier to make user interface changes once we split the code base up. So the Argo workflows code base can focus on core workflow execution, reliability, scalability, that kind of stuff. And the UI code base can just focus on UI stuff. And you don't have to build the UI when you're doing backend work, and you don't have to build the backend when you're doing UI only work. So I think there's a side effect or a benefit there in terms of developer velocity. Okay, so what does that mean for Argo events? Well, we don't currently have an user interface for Argo events, so I plan to build one. But what we really kind of need to know from people in the community is what kind of problems you think you would like to solve through the user interface, what things don't make sense to you, and what things are kind of missing. And I'm hoping I can just kind of show you what I've done so far in the last couple of days in terms of a proof of concept, explain what it does, explain the two use cases I think I'm trying to solve with it. And I don't know if one of those use cases is a valid use case or not. Vipers, have you just joined us?
Yes. Hey, Alex. Sorry, guys, I'm late. Having some connection issues with Zoom.
Okay, good. So this document just lists up at V1. I'm going to delete that. Just a list of things that people want to be able to do in the user interface that I currently think that people want to do. It might be good to just kind of walk through those and see if anybody's got any feedbacks or some additions that you want to make to that list, so that we can, I update this list and perhaps put it into a priority order so we know where to focus our energies initially. So the first, this comes from the Argo events Slack channel. The first request was to be able to see a sensor and the history of its events. I think there's a case here to explain. I don't think I've written it down in here. Explain why a workflow was triggered. I think that's kind of the underlying is, why did something happen as a result of a sequence of events inside Argo events? And so clicking on a sensor to see the history of events, or clicking from an event to the workflow that's created it, or show the types of triggers, and I think this trace view is actually, I should bring on that second line, trace view of an event through to, sorry, 1 second. Trace view from an event through to the kind of underlying, from start to end, along with the payload of those events. And I'll come back to that, why I think that might be difficult to do, and we're kind of there's probably a separate solution discussion to have around that. And then there's a couple of other ones here as well, things we don't actually do particularly well for workflows today. So the ability to create and edit event sources and sensors, and potentially the ability to kind of do a drag and drop user interface way of building a workflow. I think that's kind of a very interesting piece of work that's been mooted a couple of times, and actually think it's probably more feasible than I originally thought it was. And then things to do things like catch up and backfill for calendar events in the user interface. So things that people would currently be able to do, I believe, and Vipav, Derek, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, that Barnard's work allows you to execute calendar backup and backfill and catch up, but I'm actually not exactly clear about how you go about doing that. What use cases are missing from this list, or what things should be added to this, or what kind of comments can you give me on this? Is this a complete list?
Alex, just one thing, and this may not be, I mean, this may not apply to the workflows, but and I guess like because we want to just convert, or we want to just have both workflows and events in a one place, this thing makes sense. But in terms of Argo events, it can trigger more than workflows, but I'm fine not showing those other types of triggers in the UI. For example, it can trigger a Lambda or HTTP calls or simple Kubernetes resources, any standard resource or any other custom resource apart from Argo workflows. But yeah, this is fine. I mean, to be honest, if we are just sort of like putting out an OP and saying that, no, this is purely for workflows integration, then yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to note there.
Perfect.
On that. I'm kind of, I was interested in note, having worked in this recently, a lot of the examples use Kate's resources rather than the other examples. Derek, Daniel, what comments do you guys have?
I think this is good. You know, almost covers all the requirements from the user.
One thing, this is like a future enhancement kind of things, not like a current one. We can like suspend and resume the event source, like how we have like a cron workflow suspend and resume, that kind of things we can add it in future, but not now.
So is that an operation we can currently perform on an event source or a sensor?
Currently, we are like a user is deleting the event source and reapplying again.
So that's actually a new feature for it.
Yes, yes.
Do you guys see that? Do other people see this kind of pattern of deleting and recreating an event source?
So in terms of actual ask on the channel, I haven't seen a sort of like huge amount of support on this thing, but it may be I don't know. It's maybe too early to sort of like say that, okay, this is feature that we may need, but I totally see the value of this. But usually users just, if they want to stop it, they either get that particular configuration out of event source. That's usually how they do it right now. But yeah, I can totally see a value there.
We can have it, and that would obviously require, I think, I've forgotten what I didn't mention, but I'm just going to step back in the conversation, is that, and Bypass and Diagnosis, the Golang team who produces the client Go binaries made a breaking change in version 1.18 to require context. Yeah, we're starting to get a few complaints about that as well on the workflows channel. And so V3 could probably include that one. And if people want to run on V1.18, then they use V2. Daniel, I noticed you unmuted your microphone but didn't get a chance to speak.
Yep, I just realized that I've had the wrong microphone selected the entire time, so I've essentially been muted this whole time. I was just going to say that I don't have a ton of experience with Argo events, so I don't have a ton of input here. I'm hoping to use it more in the future. The only thought I would have at the moment is I believe with a sensor, you can have like multiple inputs that you can have filters on and all that. So will you be able to see like that, say, I don't know, you got like an HTTP event, but you're waiting on an event from S3 or something like that before continuing with the sensor?
So so that's I'm gonna put that down here. So you basically, I want to know when I'm waiting on another event.
Yeah, it would be pretty neat if you could have some sort of view where I don't know, you have like a progress indicator similar to like an Argo CD, like a spinner, and then see kind of what it's waiting on.
Yeah, okay, I'll add that to the list here. Yeah, okay, that's an interesting one. This is exactly the kind of feedback I'm looking for. Okay, I'll just show you what I've done so far as a POC based on some kind of early feedback, and this is meant to be rough and ready and disposable.
I'd like to make a suggestion if it's all right.
Please.
Yes. So I have to apologize in advance for I've never even used Argo events yet, but we're looking into it seriously for our prediction methods. And I thought of the things I would like to test when taking this into production. And I thought of a way of manual triggering the event sources. That could be very helpful mainly for testing purposes.
Interesting. My brain keeps to jump to the solution, and we probably need to talk about that maybe at the end of the meeting. And focus on the requirements. Just added that to the list there as well. I think it's quite interesting.
Thank you.
You're kind of highlighting a kind of debugging scenario, I think, aren't you?
Yes.
Like,
yes.
I want to get this working. Why isn't it working? Right. Okay.
Yes.
Is it the event source that's the issue, or is it something else in the pipeline?
Definitely. Yeah.
Trigger the event source manually. Okay, so this is what I've knocked up so far. You guys, I hope you're familiar with the workflows interface. I've made a slight iconographic change to the interface here, as I've changed the icon for workflows from a list of horizontal lines to a kind of this icon's called sitemap. We use a library called free fonts, and they only have a limited number of icons, so you have to choose one that's appropriate for it. And this one is an icon for a namespace. I don't think namespaces are right. The idea of this view was initially, the initial revision of this was to show the resources in a namespace that relate to Argo events and Argo workflows, and that quickly became clear that that was the wrong way to show it. So what it currently does is the only resource it actually shows in the namespace is a sensor. And everything else I just kind of regard as an Argo events entity. And the reason I consider them an entity is that they have a unique identifier. So obviously a sensor is a resource that has a unique identifier. These calendar here and these two webhooks, this is described by one event source, the calendar, and these two webhooks are actually described by another event source. And just hovering over, you can see it's in the Argo events namespace. It's an event is the type of entity type. It's actually in the event source webhook, and it's the field called example within that webhook. Okay, so that's what these three are here. That just happens to be how this diagram is laid out. If there were more things in the namespace, more things would appear here. I don't show the event sources because I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that they're actually not a significant thing in the system. They're not actually an entity within the world. All they are is a way to configure one or more event sources. And I believe, again, anybody can correct me, is you can actually configure a single namespace with a single event source. I don't think you need multiple event sources for a namespace. The converse is not true for sensors. And what I wanted to do was actually show the relationship between the event source and the trigger. And so on the right-hand side, you can see that I've got 3 triggers here. And these are all, and I hope the iconography is clear, or you can suggest improvements if you want to. This is different to how things are shown in the Argo CD and Argo workflows user interface, in that this is a label on the bottom, and then the icon and the name indicate the entity type. So this is a calendar, so the icon is a clock. This is a webhook, and the icon is a cloud. There are other ones. I chose a credit card for Stripe because that amused me. And Git and GitLab both have like a Git code branching symbol, so you can see different ones. I can apply them if you're interested in the iconography, but I've chosen a smaller set here because I think this shows some more of the more complicated relationships. And then this top one shows you this multi-dependency sensor one, which Daniel, you mentioned earlier, and it shows you the two event sources that go into that. And then the final item here is the Kate's trigger. So this has a single trigger. And then down here, I have a slightly more complicated one here. This webhook example has conditions on the triggers. And so I've shown this as a little bit more of a complicated way of doing it. There's a bit of certain sledgehammer. If you've got a sledgehammer, everything looks like a nut. Hammer, everything looks like a nail, sorry. So I've used an icon for a condition. But that could actually also be an icon just kind of hovering over this entity to indicate what the type is. Okay, so that's how that's laid out. Any queries or questions or commentary on how that's laid out? Or any suggestions?
One quick, maybe this is just a question. So you have conditions over here, and I'm guessing that if users were to sort of provide a complex conditions, things like test step and test step foo, that will be displayed once you hover over the conditions, or will that be?
Yeah.
So what I'm I think getting at is, I think Daniel's, or I don't know who asked the question, but in terms of showing that which condition has succeeded and which has not, in terms of what events have you gotten at this point, are we gonna show that at the conditions level or at the sensor level? Or, not sensor, but the trigger level, sorry.
So I added this. This is the last thing I've added to the POC. Actually, now looking at it, it's not how I probably would do it. So the conditions are described in terms of the dependencies. And obviously in a graph of dependencies typically described by an arrow between two boxes. But this probably shouldn't say test dep on it. So this is actually the condition verbatim. So if it was two conditions, test dep and test dep foo, that would show the whole condition there. And I think that's something I would probably want to show in the user interface. I don't think there's a way that I tried to think if there's a way to parse the condition and convert it into an abstract syntax tree, and then present the abstract syntax tree in the user interface. I felt like the cost benefit for that wasn't there, but I did want to kind of highlight that in the user interface. It would be something around this. Maybe it would be in the box, or I felt like it should be underneath, but I noticed that this is the wrong thing to call it, I think, because it should relate to, it doesn't really show that this test step one only requires the webhook to trigger, and this test step foo only requires the foo trigger. I don't think that's at all clear. In fact, it's not at all clear in the interface, and I would like that to be clear.
I think the condition stuff actually, even for the first multi-dependency workflow trigger, it also has a condition. It's like default conditions or the dependencies of the sensor. So I think maybe just save some space. We don't need the condition icon there, and just maybe a link on the trigger, or just mouse hover and then see what is the condition.
So maybe show it on the trigger instead somehow. One thing I'd note here is I think we've got a lot more. I mean, hypothesis. Unlike a workflow, I don't think we're going to have 10,000 nodes in this view. I don't think that's likely. I don't know how many of these entities might appear in a single namespace. I think it's probably going to max out at hundreds, and common cases might be a dozen. That means that the icons in this diagram can be much larger, and they can be larger than Argo CD, and they can be larger than Argo workflows. And we can display, as a result, we can display more information if we think that information is important to display and doesn't crowd the diagram. So if you think there's additional things we should display on here, or things we shouldn't display, then highlight that.
And that's also my my another question. So right now, in this on this page, you're showing like 2 sensors and 3 event sources. If you have like hundreds, and then what the page will look like.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, how many should we plan for? How many do people? I mean, Vipav, do you have a number of the largest number of event sources and sensors and triggers that you've seen?
I would say event sources. If you look at a specific event source itself, I say the number is in tens instead of hundreds. So it's not that big of the configuration that a particular user put under event sources. Now, in terms of how many event sources they deploy in one namespace, as well as how much of the actual like sensor pods, I don't have a number for that. But I do not think it's in any comparison with the workflow use cases that we see usually. So I don't think anybody will complain UI is slow or it's not getting loaded with the icons or anything like that, at least for now.
I'm just going to say. Okay, so that's that. So a couple of the details in this. Do we need to display some additional information about the event sources? Question.
I mean, I think if we sort of like click on that particular calendar event source, I would guess that we will have something like a side panel that opens up that provides you more. Okay, there you go. Perfect. Yeah. So I think, yeah, this is perfectly fine. If there is anything that we want to add on top of these three tabs, I think we should be able to do this in this view.
So we have this kind of same issue with you just look at a workflow. We tend to display the YAML. I'm displaying it here because that's really cheap to do. This is a really cheap component to put into a web page. But if it's not necessarily the right component, the right representation, we can look at the representations. And you can see that I'm showing the event source here. It's called calendar, but I haven't highlighted the particular block of this. This is actually that node is actually this really those 4 lines. I've added a couple of other tabs here while we're here. One is an events tab that shows events whose involved object is the event source. Now, I don't believe the event source is producing any events, and I don't think the sensor is producing any events either. If I show, normally when you click that, you see other things, shows everything in the namespace. I think this might not be valuable, the event view, except that I wonder if there's a use case to explain why you guys haven't queried why everything's blue in this user interface. That they're blue because all the conditions are true on the object. And I think, is there a use case to explain to me if the thing is not correctly configured or not starts up correctly? The same way you might have a deployment and your image is going to image pull back off. Is there something we should be displaying here for that? This is showing me that currently my configuration, but it doesn't show me that that's not correct. I've just gone because these conditions all appear to be true, and I actually don't know what these conditions mean. I've assumed that means that that's probably working okay. Is that a valid thing we should show on the interface, or is it actually incorrect to color these things in blue because they appear to be working?
You might have more visibility into the status conditions.
Those conditions are the reconciliation conditions, like those status generated by the controller, basically.
Yeah. So the controller thinks it's set it up correctly.
Yeah.
Okay. Then you can go into logs to see if it actually is working or not in terms of connectivity to the external event source and what's happening. I guess with calendar, it's because it is producing events on its own.
Yeah.
There won't be a typical issue with this particular event source. One thing I would like to see, and maybe this is a stretch, I don't know, but I was looking at like the open fast UI the other day. And one thing that they show on the UI is the number of invocations for a function. How many actually succeeded, how many invocations failed. So in terms of having that info for triggers, for example, the particular trigger was invoked like 100 times in last 1 hour or whatever the number can be, and how many of that actually failed and how many succeed. In terms of success in for trigger is sensor able to create that workflow or not, and then downstream a process will actually determine the actual status of that workflow, but that's fine for us.
Yeah, I mean, I have what is not displayed in this user interface is anything that might appear to the right of this case. Originally, I displayed the workflow here. The challenge that I had around that is I feel like this is a configuration view. It shows me the configuration, but it doesn't necessarily show me what's actually happening at runtime. Should we be showing those resources here? And I'm assuming we can base that on labels.
Yeah, I'm to be honest, yeah, I'm not sure whether we should show them or we just have a sort of like, I don't know, a simple box that if you click on that, it just goes to that workflow section, and there you can drill down into particular workflows. But again, I don't know what's the best sort of like path we should take here.
Okay, we can come back and ponder. I mean, we can ponder that. It makes the initial version more complicated because my thoughts are that your Argo events configuration is typically quite stable. Once you install it, resources are not being created and deleted a lot of the time. Again, correct me if I'm wrong on that assumption. I might. And the reason that is important is with the workflows user interface, in fact, we can probably see it here. This interface will tick over every time something new has appeared in this list, and I don't have to refresh the page to do that. And that's because I have additional, code that does that. That code is expensive.
Yeah, I would say with this particular view that you are showing us right now, there is just sort of like I think it's like one-time construction of event sources and your sensors and whatnot. So this view won't change that much. Sure, there will be a like whenever user adds a new event configuration in event source, yeah, the user just need to refresh this page, or like we'll get that information at that point. But yeah, it's not like, okay, every second or so, whenever the thing runs, it's adding like 100 extra nodes in the UI. That's not the case.
Cool. Okay, so this is a thought I had. I'm gonna move a bit into more a solutionizing area, and we're also out of time. So if you want to drop off, that's fine for the meetings. I'm recording this. I'll drop the video onto YouTube so people can review it later on if they want. One of the requests was to show events going through the system. That's obviously a how, not a why. I think the why is, explain how my system is operating. So we talked a bit about that. Now I've discussed this a bit with Derek, and the challenge is that the Argo server speaks to typically the Kubernetes API in the namespace that it's installed, not in the user namespace. So you install the user interface in some kind of system namespace, and then it reads and writes from the Kubernetes API. That's not the only source of data in Argo events. The obviously other sort of data is your event bus within the system. So that adds a lot of complexity if we need to read from that. And I'm kind of also aware that event bus could have a very high level of throughput, thousands of messages a second. So for the user interface to sit 1,000 messages a second and send them back to the user is a bit of a challenge. And I wondered if we could solve that problem separately, which is hence the logs here. So if I click on this and then go through the logs, these are the logs for the sensor itself. So when you look at that, it's a log for the sensor. But I noticed in here, typically we have additional information such as trigger name in it. And I wondered if we could actually use the logs as a way to infer information about what a particular trigger was doing, parse the log line and extract the trigger name from it, and then do that. And what I'd done originally for this was, I'm just going to send a webhook message to it. Or am I? I just sent a webhook message, and if the code is working, oh no, okay, hang on seconds. My port forward has disconnected itself. I've got a connection. We're going to try again. I do an animation or something along those sort of lines around when a log message appears related to a particular entity in the diagram. Any thoughts on that?
That is actually cool that you get to see sort of like live animation.
I think the animation is easy, and it kind of cuts a corner by using the pod logs, because that is a part of a Kubernetes API where you could get a lot of information through, but it makes the assumption that the logs contain information that we can extract and then put into the user interface, and that may be false. That might be false.
But only thing we need to consider in the real production system, lot of event source and event will be dump into a lot of logs. So probably that animation may be very, it will not be show very good when the too many logs are coming.
Yeah, may not be very good. I wasn't sure if this user interface could do with some additional filters. That was the other thing. Currently, I've just got a filter for namespace here, and I wondered if it could do with some other filters on it.
Are we thinking of like filtering based on type of event source? Like if I just want to look at how many webhook event source I got, or S3 event sources, and just filter on those?
I mean, what would you like to filter on? Yeah, I guess that's the question. Do you need filters? Would you want that?
On the type of event source. So
I mean, I just call everything in this diagram is I consider an entity, but you could add a kind of a filter to the bar. Then you could just choose calendar.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
As that.
Yeah, something along those lines. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Just some notes. I want to put this where people can play around with it. Is it just the best of an option to publish an Argo CLI image for people to consume? Would you actually give it a go if it was available?
Yeah, I will try it. I'm sure.
Okay, cool. Okay. I don't have anything more to show around the kind of proof of concept. So I just want to open up the floor to anybody who wants to ask any questions or make any suggestions.
I just want to say that this is pretty cool. I'm super excited. Yeah, this is first time. Yeah, I mean, having UI and Argo events is like, yeah, by itself is awesome thing. So yeah, cool.
Yeah, I'm very keen. I want to make sure this is valuable and useful to everybody. I'd also want to kind of encourage people to get hands-on. If they want to play around with some ideas and check. I was probably going to push the code onto an origin branch, so people can play around with it and see and have a go themselves, and make changes if they want to, and commit to that branch, which I consider like a POC branch. I need to give it a name though. I currently call it sensor, but that's not a very good name. Oh, I got a question in the chat. Okay, thank you. Very nice. Okay. Okay. So do pop us your feedback on this form. I'll insert the details of that up here, and thank you all for coming along today.
Thanks.
Thanks, Alex.
No worries.
Thanks for the demo. Very nice.
Yeah, super cool.